Hey, folks, welcome to InTheMoneyStocks.com's live trading action video. My name is Gareth Soloway, Chief Market Strategist here. Today's date is Tuesday, February 12th, 2019. So take a look at the spiders today, the S&P 500 tracking ETF. Finally, today, we're getting that final push up, piercing the daily 200 moving average. Usually, you want to see a pierce of the major moving averages, which kind of solidifies a major resistance hit. You can see right here we kissed it. We didn't officially touch it. Today you can't say that for sure. It's actually touching and piercing. Now, the volume today on such a nice up day, we're up about $3.72, 1.37%. Look at the volume today. Super, super light. You might say, well, how come? I mean, markets are up big. Well, what this tells us is that there's big institutions not participating. So a majority of the volume is bots trading back and forth and smaller investors, smaller funds. If the big boys were participating and buying heavily, you would see this market with 100 million or at least 75 million at this point in time. What that tells us is that it's probably a rally that not necessarily should be trusted. And it kind of makes sense, right? If you think about it logically, the markets are rallying today because there's an agreement in Congress, which is a shock itself, but an agreement between Republicans and Democrats to avoid another government shutdown and hammer out a deal on border security and other things for the government to stay open. So obviously it's a nice thing, all right, thank God we don't have another shutdown, etc. But I don't think this was ever an issue that was really concerning the market overly. So really the big issue right now is the China trade war going on, and that's what we're waiting to hear. Now, this is options expiration week, so another thing you want to pay attention to is, do we see this first upswing in the market in the first half of the week lead to a whipsaw back the other way later this week? For instance, do we get on Thursday or Friday some sort of negative report from the negotiations between the U.S. and China on trade that sends the markets back down? Oftentimes that occurs because the big institutions are trying to whip this market one way or the other to essentially cause those options that all the average investors have bought to expire worthless. So that's generally the goal, and that's oftentimes what happens. We call Wednesday on Options X Wednesday, which is the Wednesday before options expiration. We refer to that as Whipsaw Wednesday because of the crazy moves that kind of lure in the not-so-smart investors to get whipsawed and ultimately take losses, giving the big institutions the big profits during Options X week. A couple charts I want to pay attention to here. Take a look at IYT today. I picked up some puts on IYT as we approach, just at these highs now, as we approach this daily 200 moving average. Huge level here, folks. Absolutely huge level. Another thing I want to just point out here, you also have this trend line. So you have dual factor coming into dual factor resistance here. The high pivot here connected to this high, and you're basically right into that today. So again, I thought today was a good idea to pick up some puts. I can always add in the next couple days if we inch a bit higher. But again, I did pick up some puts on IYT today for a pullback. My guess is you pull back here. There's a pretty clear level. There's a gap fill here and the 200 moving average. If we get that type of pullback on the IYT, I will make a boatload on those put options. So keep an eye on that, folks. It looks like a good trade setup. Another thing to keep an eye on, the SMH, folks. SMH continues to kind of pop up here. There were some resistance points here that we're through. We're back above the 200. Now, what's important here, and let me remove these trend lines for now. We don't need them at this point. But what's important here is, look, you got above the 200 here, and then you fell back below. There was no confirmation. They whipped out those small investors. Today, I would guess we're going to stay up here and close up in this upper range. Watch for confirmation tomorrow. If confirmation occurs, the IYT could go a little bit higher. I still think you're into significant resistance. I mean, there's just a ton of resistance points here across the board. All these little pivot points are going to be resistance. So it's kind of, considering how much of a move on the semis we've made, it would be somewhat a surprise if we continue up here without some sort of substantial pullback. We had a pullback last week, but it was a pretty small pullback considering, and quickly erased with today's up move. So this will be very interesting to see, folks. And again, I'm actually short right from this high here last week on the SMH, and so we're basically flat on the trade at this point in time, but I do expect the semis to pull back pretty sharply. Looking across the board, we have Amazon trading up nicely today. Amazon's trading up 45 points. I don't have much on that chart, as it's just kind of a choppy chart ever since they reported earnings. Let me see if there's any other charts. Oil today's having a good day, so really it's all things rocking and rolling today across the board. Keep an eye on a couple stocks out there. I was looking at Netgear, NTGR. taking a pounding today. I do have a level coming up on Netgear at 32, and it's not quite there yet. But if this gets down in the next hour, 2 hours, or even into tomorrow into 32, look for a bounce off of 32. This is much more of a day trade or maybe a 1 day, 24-hour hold type of trade. But again, 32 is a major pivot point on that stock for a good opportunity for those of you that want to get in and out with a quick gain pretty quickly. All right. On that note, I'm going to step aside, but again, some intriguing chart action. Again, I think that the tale of today, the summary of today is great upside in the markets, but no volume behind it, which again is a warning sign. Doesn't mean we can't hold the gains today, because as long as there's light volume, they can continue to float this market up. But it means that any sort of blip on the screen, any sort of unforeseen surprise, especially tomorrow being Whipsaw Wednesday, could create a market that quickly comes back to earth after today's upside. All right, guys, have a great one. As always, thank you, and I will talk to you all soon. Take care.